all right. Let's see how quickly it's picking up. So, trying to get started. I apologize for the brief delay. My name is Dennis Misigoy, Libertarian, running for the U.S. Senate here in the state of Florida. Sorry for the delay. A little bit of technical difficulties trying to get started streaming. I missed last week doing any live streams, in part just stuff going on, and also a little bit of changeover with some of the hardware. And actually, right now as I was trying to get started, I actually got prompted, had to go do a little software update, force restart. So unfortunately, it took me a couple minutes off of getting started over here, but here I am. And last week, as I mentioned, I didn't get to doing any streaming on my own. I did, if you missed it, get to do two interviews that actually went live on Monday of last week, which was one with Tim Crosby from the Swampcast Network. I need to post links to that, something under the channel, because I know I can post links to that as like a social media post, whatever, with the images and stuff here on YouTube. I don't do it that much, but on Facebook, you probably, if you're watching this on Facebook, you can probably already find the links on the page, on the campaign page, and as well as on Break the Cycle with Joshua Smith, as I like to refer to as the rightful chair of the LNC after all the wonderful things that have gone on over the last year or so over there, but still an at-large rep, and I think I know he's running for vice chair over there coming up in the convention in Reno. So check those out if you have an opportunity. If you really feel for a dearth of content, those are actually longer than my normal live streams here. So touch on a little bit different things, because rather than just kind of going on topics, it's the sort of interview format, and get a little bit more about kind of delving into background. But obviously, if there's something you guys are curious about, you guys can ask the questions here, because that's part of the fun of this, of having these kind of streams, and just setting this up to be able to connect with some of you guys. So feel free to and get connected. So I'm gonna just kind of go and jump into some random topics, stuff over the last week or so. One of the things I thought was interesting, and so just as something to make a commentary on what has one of the things we've seen recently with the OSHA mandates coming up to the Supreme Court, and some of the discussion that went on around that. One of the things people talked a lot about, and I guess got a little bit of traction in the news cycle, was the statement from Justice Sotomayor regarding 100,000 kids being hospitalized for COVID, as a wildly inaccurate figure. Even I believe the total, like the entire total of children or people under 18, let's say, who were hospitalized with COVID or in anything related to it, didn't total that high, even over the last year. And she's obviously talking about the current status of it, the current wave. And you know, that's so wildly inaccurate. Like, the current total for like the week or something was, you know, maybe a couple thousand. I forget the exact number, but the point is that it was wildly off. And one of the things I think is important is that it's really illustrative of the fact that just how little sometimes the people in government know. And typically the Supreme Court isn't that bad in that regard. The Supreme Court is actually, typically, because they have a kind of a more narrow focus, you don't really see the sort of buffoonery that I tend to observe in the legislature, or even in the executive branch. I think back to a few years back when I think one of the first big times Zuckerberg came to D.C. and was getting questioned by a few senators and Congress members, and you know, it's sort of comedic, you know, and people even played it with some sort of funny music and whatnot. But you would see these guys get up and they'd be talking to asking ridiculous questions like, "Hey, if you're not charging for your service, how do you make any money?" And it's like some of the more basic things that are so absurd. So the point I'm trying to get at is that there's a maybe less commonplace assumption, certainly among folks who lean libertarian, but there's a sort of assumption that we're all kind of raised growing up in the United States and sort of revering, and I don't know how much it exists in other parts of the world, but sort of with an expectation or reverence towards elected officials or leaders within government who hold these positions of high esteem, thinking that, well, if they must know what they're doing, these must be intelligent, special people to be our leaders in some regard. And the truth is that they're not really exceptional in these kind of ways. I mean, there may be some who are. Certainly there's some people we might look at, in particular for a lot of us libertarians who can, over the last decade, who look at Ron Paul and some folks like that, Justin Amash, and think, well, at a bare minimum, at least being very principled, if not exceptional in other ways. But by and large, people being in government is not a qualification in of itself. And I think it's important to recognize that these people are capable of being just wildly wrong about things. And, it's all the more reason why you don't want these people in charge of all these things. And that's assuming the best of intentions of everyone, is simply the fact that they will never have sufficient knowledge. There's a great quote I heard from Thomas Sowell. I'm trying to think if it was actually in the book, but I know I heard him say it offhand, or someone else quote him about it. But it is that it's much easier to concentrate power than it is to concentrate knowledge. And that is sort of fundamental to why it's so important that governmental entities never be vested with all that sort of power to control these things, because they will never possess the knowledge to be able to make the right decisions in these contexts. So I got a question from Roman Brigands. Do I think the Democrats will lose big in the 2022 midterms? I do, just because of the policies that they've sort of doubled down on. We got an inkling of that in the sort of little elections that we had, limited sort of elections we had in 2021. You saw with like the governor's race in Virginia, I think is a bit of a bellwether. If Democrats are not willing to reconsider some of the positions, and I'm not quite sure if they're, I'd say, reconsidering it, but there is a little bit of reframing of some of the talk about COVID, and I don't know if they're how ready they are to pivot on some of these policy positions. But again, if they're going into if they go into 2022, or if they continue on, if they go into the 2022 elections still staking out these positions that they're currently hung up on, such as pro-lockdown, pro-mandate, as well as some of the crazy stuff as far as schools. The want to keep schools shut down. The parents shouldn't have a say in what kids learn. I mean, some of that stuff is just far out there. There's a little bit with the cultural stuff, but I just think they've pushed kind of the advantage that they've had too far, and they have had an advantage. I think it's worth noting that in a lot of the sort of cultural conflicts of the last several decades, they really have come out ahead in a lot of ways. It's informative to consider the fact that in the last 30 years, I believe it's within the last 30 years, maybe even more, only one time has a Republican in the last, is it 20? I'm trying to think now. How far back am I going here? But at least the last 20, maybe more than that, 20, 25, maybe not quite 30. Maybe it'll get to 30 now. Actually, no, I think it is 30, because we're in 2022. That's going to take us back to 92. That is when Clinton won against Papa Bush. And so in the last 30 plus years, in every presidential election, Republicans have won the popular vote exactly once, and that was in 2004. If you think about that, and I know the popular vote isn't what decides the presidential election, but it does tell you something, that there's more people who think, certainly at that level of government, more people overall in this country who thought that a Democrat should be in charge. And that is, again, only once in 30 years have, and not that there's a huge sample size, because there's not that many elections, it's every 4 years, but still, I think over a 30-year span, the fact that only once has a Republican won the popular vote in the presidential election, it does indicate something. and certainly we've seen it in some other kind of policies. But again, the direction that Democrats have gone in and doubled down on really over the last year or so, I think is going to be catastrophic for them. So we're going to see. We're going to see. I'm hoping. I'm hoping that voters will make them pay the price. Obviously, I'm also hoping that folks will choose something a little better than a Republican wherever they have the opportunity. Even though I will give some credit, even if I don't think that it's necessarily based on the same ideas and correct principles and whatnot, I am appreciative of where Republicans have gotten stuff right. Even if some of them I think should be absolute no-brainers, such as all the stuff with schools. You know, here in Florida, we're very fortunate in terms of the options we have. As far as school choice, obviously having schools stay open, and certainly the lack of, or the opposition to, I should really say, because it's not even just a lack of, but an opposition to mandates and some of these other crazier COVID-related policies over the last couple of years. Even if or let me put it a different way, regardless of what the reasons are, the end result in the policies have been a net benefit to us as a state and the people of the state, and so I'm appreciative of that. So I got another question pop up on the same one, also from Roman, about libertarians win some state house races this year. I think we should be able to. I believe we won a state legislator race in the last election cycle. It was somewhere out west. I can't remember exactly. I don't have it memorized off the top of my head. And this is the one tricky part about this. I don't know everybody who's running. I know a few people who are running. You really have to look, in particular with us as third party, you really have to look at all the factors about a given race to kind of make a prediction like that, because there's a lot of things that need to fall into place for us, and we need to have kind of the right people in a district where there's an opportunity and so forth. And I'll be honest, I don't have my finger on the pulse of the party and that sort of activity across the country to be able to make a real assessment. I do think a lot of folks in the party are sort of progressing in a way that would allow us to do that. But a lot of it also boils down to the candidate, and we, as a party, we have a pretty wide gamut of different sort of people come with different approaches, because we are not the establishment. We don't have a machine that produces like a solid pipeline of candidates. I'm trying to be a part of something like that, and have tried to. It's part of what I did running for local office and getting elected. Back in 2016, I ran for and got elected to Community Development District Supervisor seat, back where I used to live in Miami-Dade County. And part of that was part of a larger effort that we were doing first in Miami-Dade County and then across the state, which was to try to get libertarians to run for local office, to be able to take those opportunities and build up a little experience in both trying to run, in trying to serve in public office, and to have a little bit of a resume there to run on. And overall, as an organization, to try to start to create a pipeline of candidates. I don't know that we're there yet in terms of really having that, and obviously in terms of some of the other infrastructure, like real campaign support, fundraising, and things like that, we are still far behind the big two. So it's hard to, I think there's so much variation between what you see from different candidates and their ability to run a decent campaign. Even myself is still very much, obviously I'm trying to run against a very uphill challenge here. The odds are always very long for us. There's a tremendous bias against third-party candidates in general, and there's a lot to overcome. So it boils down to the specifics, and I've got to be honest with you, I don't know enough. I know we have some good here in Florida, but But that's part of the challenge, and it's part of this wall we're trying to break. Right now, it's not predictable. I think from our standpoint, we've got to go and give the best shot we can. And yes, I agree with you, Roman. I do believe the Democrats are also going to be picking Val Demings as their nominee for the U.S. Senate seat. Unless something really big changes between now and then, that is my expectation. I don't really see it changing. And it's sort of instructive, I guess, for me. I try as much as I can to, hammer this point home. It's probably something, I guess, maybe more for us as libertarians or for other folks who are maybe not so committed to one side or the other, because those folks, it really doesn't make a difference. But for one of the things I find very sort of humorous but a little bit disheartening is the fact that Val Demings is doing, I would say, well in terms of having her name out there and fundraising and being kind of the front runner there. If you've taken the time to go to her website and look at the stuff she has out there, there's no policy. There's no policy positions. There's no talk about, well, I'm going to do this and that. Not in any specific terms in terms of, like I said, policy. It is, there's a nice story about her background, and, there's some slogans talking about she's never going to tire about doing this or that for Floridians. I always try to make the point, as much as I can get anyone to listen, that she definitely will never tire of voting for more money for the military-industrial complex. She is a reliable vote for the NDAA and any other expansion of powers or funding. And I've tried to hammer home the point that, both her and Marco Rubio both were, solid votes for the National Defense Authorization Act that just passed at the end of the year. Was signed by President Biden, I believe, right after Christmas. Another $750 billion. Another over $750 billion being sent to the military-industrial complex as for 1 year, to year that's an increase of over 5%, of around 5% increase, even after exiting the longest war in American history. It's baffling to me, but and that's one of those ones I try to bring up in part also because when I see Democrat voter enthusiasm for her, I try to bring this up because I think even most of those people who are not necessarily all about, cutting spending and being fiscally responsible, I think at least most of them, if you ask them about, what should we be spending on, most of them don't think we should be increasing spending there. So it's one of those things, trying to take the opportunity to bring that along and point out to those folks that who they think they may be getting, where they have this nice story and whatever else, is the reality is more of just the establishment. It boils down to that. It's just another establishment candidate, another establishment representative of the two-party cartel. I thought it was sort of humorous. Rubio brought it up himself when she first kind of burst out, or at least announced that she was going to pursue it and was sort of the anointed front runner, was the fact that I think during the last session of Congress prior to this one, she literally voted 100% of the time with Nancy Pelosi, which would sort of epitomize party allegiance and establishment ties over any sort of connection to the local community. Obviously, Florida is quite a bit different, and certainly there are people in Florida who love the idea of voting in that way, but I think anyone should have pause when they see something like that. Someone who votes absolutely in lockstep with their party's leader in that legislative body. So that's an interesting point from Joe over here about the 5% increase on the military spending. Well, if we've got 7% inflation, maybe we're winning in terms of them getting less wealth. I hadn't looked at it that way, but I guess that's one way to put a positive spin on it. Unfortunately, it still means that all the rest of us are getting 7% inflation without getting the 5%. So, and certainly when you're talking about 5%. When you talk about $750 million, you're talking about a really baffling amount of money, mind-boggling when you think about it, and it's not like it makes sense within the context. I'm not going to try and pull up the graphic here, but if you've ever gone and look at the graphic, if you go and look at the video I posted about the NDA passing, it's pinned on my Twitter account. It's the pinned tweet. Sorry. If you happen to check out the stuff on Twitter, but it should be posted here on Facebook as well if you're looking there. Which I have a nice little graphic where it shows the video, and you look at military spending over time. It's not like we're in some kind of race to keep up with the other nations. The U.S. is spending like 3 times as much as the next country, and more than like the next 7 or 8 combined. It is outrageous, and it's part of what feeds this. Again, we're hurtling towards $30 trillion in debt. None of these things are disconnected from one another, and that's going to be an important thing to kind of that's going to be an important thing for us to try to hammer home, because I know not everybody necessarily feels the pain of, the seemingly endless wars abroad. Obviously, we did finally exit Afghanistan, but the United States is still pursuing a policy of being the kingmaker across the Middle East and deciding who should be in power and who shouldn't, and antagonizing towards certain countries. And if you haven't, I would highly recommend. I'm finding it very informative. Not that I didn't already have a good sense about this stuff, but it is nice to hear really in so much detail. The recent book out by Scott Horton, Enough Already, Time to End America's War on Terrorism, or Time to End the War on Terrorism. I forget exactly how the subtitle is, but the name of the book is Enough Already. It's by Scott Horton. Worth your time to listen to really gain some perspective on all these conflicts that are going on, and really what has driven the U.S. to it. This policy and how this stuff has been in, and the difference between what we're presented as the public and what is really going on over there. Because the decision making is not what they tell you that it is. Circling back, again, the average person isn't necessarily feeling the worse than pain, I should say, of a drone strike that kills a family, or blows up a wedding or a hospital or a school. All these sort of things that we've seen over the past couple of decades. All of this human suffering, but because it's done abroad, because it's done so far away, us as the voters maybe don't necessarily feel it in the same way. While it certainly is for me, I would say for me that's a bigger, a more moving aspect to it. But even if it's something where you just say, well, I'm just trying to get through my daily life here, I'm just trying to get through it. Well, it's important to understand that these things are all interconnected. Every red cent that is taken from you and spent on the maintenance of this empire is money that contributes to this debt, contributes to this inflation, because again, there's no way they can do all these things. And this is one of the things that many libertarians have been cautioning about for a very, very long time, is that the nation lives beyond its means and tries to maintain these policies that are just unsustainable. And this is one aspect to it, and it's not an aspect that can be overlooked. I know that for a lot of people, even if for a lot of us, we can look at a lot of policies, domestic policies, let's say, things like welfarism, the welfare state, when we talk about that, and regulatory states. Regulatory stuff I can go after a little bit harder in terms of saying, well, this is really just obviously doing damage because it is, because it's incurring such a cost and making it so much more difficult for folks to do business and to create new things. But in terms of like welfare, for example, as bad as it may be, it's still in some context and have a lot of negative consequences. When you view in the grand scope of things all of the horrible things that government does, as we mentioned, we didn't even get into stuff like the drug war. There's so many things we can talk about, the terrible harm that government does. Giving money away to poor people doesn't seem like really as terrible of a thing. There are problems with it. There's problems with redistribution of wealth in general, but one of the things I'd say about it is that we need to, recognize the impact that it has. All of these things have an impact because of where the resources come from, but the easiest places to cut should be the most morally indefensible. And for me, that's the maintenance of the empire. Once you can get past the irrational fear that is stoked into so many people about that and other things, and some of the other policies. So let's. Oh, there is a question snuck in here between a couple of comments from Joe. Another one from Roman. Do I think Rand Paul Massey should switch to Libertarian Party? I'd like to see it. I mean, I think there might be some areas in terms of positions that they've staked out where maybe they might have to revise. Where I'd like to see them revise them. There's stuff that we would definitely agree on in terms of economics and a lot of the hesitancy and even in the past where I've given Rand Paul a hard time about stuff, I would still be willing to obviously recognize the fact that, in particular, with relation to COVID and going after Fauci and trying to bring a lot of this information to light, he's done tremendous work there as well. So and it's stuff I'm appreciative of. I would certainly like to see Rand Paul, and Massey as well. I would like to see, I'll be simple. I would like to see as many people as possible join the Libertarian Party. Certainly people who have any inkling of these ideas and these principles of individual liberty, sitting legislators or not, but obviously having people who are already there and have already done the work and have already been a part of that, I think that'd be a great thing. So, I could nitpick on certain policies, and I think that there's certainly things they might not want to double down on anymore. But, everybody should have the opportunity. Everybody should be a part of this. I think a point I try to drive home whenever I can is that part of the reason why we have political parties in general, and why in particular we as a third party, why we bother with having a third party versus not just saying, well, if I'm not going to be part of the two parties, I'm just going to be independent. Look, this is a Herculean task that we're engaged in terms of trying to break this cycle and trying to get through this and change the trajectory we're on as a nation. That is a huge task, and we need nobody can do this alone. We need as much support and as much help from anyone that we can, anyone who's willing to support those efforts. So I would like to see as many folks as possible. Even again, I'll backtrack on some of the things I was saying a moment ago and be, I don't need people to be perfect. I don't need people to have 100% alignment with the platform on every issue. The most important thing is a recognition of the problem we have, which is that our political system has been dominated by two parties who share a core principle belief that the power and scope of government is basically unlimited. That it's like the mandate of heaven. They have the power to do whatever they want, and it's legitimate, and that no matter what, they that the arguments about what government does simply boil down to a question of what it should do, and never a question of what it actually has legitimate authority to do. This isn't even a question for them when they consider things like mandates and whatnot. Even with Massey, I recall him, posting, talking about how the OSHA mandate was illegitimate because it didn't have congressional approval. And I made sure to make the point for anybody who will listen. It doesn't matter if it has congressional approval. It is still unconstitutional. The Congress does not have power to do this either. So it is important for us to recognize that. But anybody who is willing to recognize that, anybody who is willing to, who wants to work towards correcting this core issue, the central issue that is the problem, which is this stranglehold on power that this cartel of the two parties has. Join us, sign up, and please, I could use the help. All of us can. This is the struggle that we're in, and again, the writing's on the wall, and not just the 30 trillion in debt that we're getting close to. It is the policies, it is the conflict, it is the polarization, and there's not enough that can be said about it. So, man, I really didn't get too far down my list. I didn't get to mock the president trying to brag about job creation in the most absurd of ways. So, how can we help the campaign? That's the easy question to answer. And actually, I don't have the donate URL to throw up on the screen like I normally do. As I mentioned, I had to change over some things, so that's what I need to add back in. But you have the URL to the website. I got to get the right hand over here. It's tricky because it doesn't actually exist in front of me. But if you head over to the URL, Misigoy.com, hey, it's only 7 characters, even if it is a strange name that you're not used to typing. But go there. There's a donate link on the corner. There's also a link on there, a page for a form. Anybody who wants to get involved, who has some time, can support it in a different way. You can fill in your information, and we can try and get organized to reach out to more folks. So those are the easy and obvious things. There we go. There's the link, and it's also should be in the description as well. So. And spread the word. Obviously, spread the word to folks as well. As I said, this is a big job. Nobody can do it alone. If anyone is trying to do it alone, they're not going to make it. I'm certainly not going to make it if I'm doing it alone. So, come on and help out. And I am at around the time I want to be keeping these things too. So, I'm going to call it quits for this stream, and we'll catch up with you guys next week. Let me think. Anything else I want to throw out there? LPF convention coming next month. I'm trying to think of anything else in the meantime, much sooner than that. Not too much planned, but I should be on here, and I'll try to keep stuff. If you're not already, make sure to follow on social media, subscribe on the page, get connected in every way you can, so that you miss as little as possible. All right. Thank you guys again for tuning in, and for everybody else who decides to listen after. All right, and I'll talk to you guys next week.
Mm-hmm.